Willowbrook was a small, picturesque town nestled in a valley surrounded by dense forests. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and life moved at a slow, peaceful pace. The town had a single main street lined with quaint shops, a post office, and a small veterinary clinic, run by Dr. Harris, a man in his late 50s who had dedicated his life to caring for animals. Emily Carter, a 28-year-old freelance photographer, had moved to Willowbrook 6 months ago to escape the chaos of city life. She lived in a cozy cottage on the outskirts of town with her beloved cat, Whiskers. Whiskers was a fluffy, orange tabby with a playful personality and a knack for getting into trouble. Emily adored him, and the two were inseparable. One morning, Emily noticed that Whiskers was acting strangely. He was lethargic, refusing to eat, and seemed to be in discomfort. Concerned, she decided to take him to Dr. Harris. Dr. Harris's clinic was a small, rustic building with a welcoming atmosphere. Emily carried Whiskers inside, where they were greeted by the friendly receptionist, Martha. After a short wait, Dr. Harris called them into the examination room. "What seems to be the problem?" Dr. Harris asked, his kind eyes scanning Whiskers. "He's been acting really off," Emily explained. "He's not eating, he's lethargic, and he just doesn't seem like himself." Dr. Harris nodded and began his examination. He checked Whiskers' temperature, listened to his heartbeat, and felt his abdomen. Everything seemed normal at first, but then Dr. Harris noticed something unusual. Whiskers' stomach felt slightly swollen, and when he pressed gently, the cat let out a pained meow. Dr. Harris murmured. "This is odd. I'd like to run a few tests to rule out any internal issues." Emily agreed, and Dr. Harris took blood samples and performed an ultrasound. The results were shocking. Whiskers had a foreign object in his stomach, something that didn't belong there. Dr. Harris decided to perform a minor procedure to remove the object. Emily waited anxiously in the lobby, her mind racing with worry. What could possibly be inside her cat? Had he swallowed something dangerous? After what felt like an eternity, Dr. Harris emerged from the operating room. His face was pale and he looked visibly shaken. "Emily," he said slowly, "you need to see this." She followed him into the room, where Whiskers lay sedated on the table. Dr. Harris pointed to a small, clear container on the counter. Inside was something that made Emily's stomach churn. A live, wriggling worm, about 6 inches long. This came out of Whiskers, Dr. Harris said, his voice trembling. "I've never seen anything like it in my entire career." Emily stared in horror at the worm. It was thick and fleshy, with a slimy, translucent body. It moved in a way that was almost hypnotic, coiling and uncoiling as if searching for something. "What? What is it?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not entirely sure," Dr. Harris admitted. "It's unlike any parasite I've encountered. I'll need to send it to a lab for analysis." Over the next few days, Emily couldn't shake the image of the worm from her mind. She spent hours researching online, trying to find any information about similar cases, but nothing matched what she had seen. The worm seemed to be something entirely new, or something that shouldn't exist. Meanwhile, Whiskers began to recover. He was eating again and seemed to be back to his old self. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. She started noticing strange things around her house. Small, slimy trails on the floor, a faint, earthy smell that she couldn't place, and an eerie sense of being watched. One night, Emily was woken by a loud thud coming from the living room. She grabbed a flashlight and went to investigate, her heart pounding in her chest. What she found made her blood run cold. Whiskers was sitting in the middle of the room, staring at something on the floor. Emily shone her flashlight and saw another worm, this one even larger than the first. It was writhing and twisting as if trying to escape. But the most horrifying part was that it seemed to be moving toward Whiskers. Emily screamed and grabbed her cat, rushing him to safety. She called Dr. Harris immediately, but it was the middle of the night and he didn't answer. Desperate, she decided to film the worm as evidence. She set up her camera and began recording, her hands shaking as she zoomed in on the creature. The footage was chilling. The worm moved with a purpose, its body pulsating as it inched closer to the camera. Then, without warning, it reared up, as if sensing it was being watched. Emily's scream echoed through the house as the worm lunged at the camera, the screen going black. Emily's cottage became a focal point for the investigation. Scientists set up a makeshift lab in her living room, analyzing the worms and studying their behavior. Emily watched as they dissected the creatures, their translucent bodies revealing intricate networks of veins and organs. The worms were unlike anything anyone had ever seen. They had no eyes, no mouths, yet they moved with a terrifying sense of purpose. Jarrus worked tirelessly alongside the scientists, his decades of experience proving invaluable. He noticed something peculiar about the worms. They seemed to emit a faint, pulsating glow when exposed to certain frequencies of light. This discovery led to a breakthrough. The worms were sensitive to ultraviolet light, which could be used to detect and potentially neutralize them. Despite the quarantine, the worms continued to spread. Pets and livestock across Willowbrook began showing symptoms of infection: lethargy, loss of appetite, and strange behavior. Some animals became aggressive, attacking their owners or other animals. Others simply vanished, leaving behind only slimy trails and a faint, earthy smell. The situation took a darker turn when humans started falling ill. The first case was Martha, the receptionist at Dr. Harris's clinic. She complained of severe headaches and nausea, and within days she began exhibiting bizarre behavior. She would mutter incoherently, her eyes glazed over, and she seemed to be in a constant state of agitation. When doctors examined her, they found a worm embedded in her brain. The discovery sent shockwaves through the town. The worms weren't just infecting animals, they were targeting humans too. The infection spread rapidly, with more and more people falling victim to the parasites. The hospital was overwhelmed, and the streets of Willowbrook were eerily quiet, save for the occasional scream or the sound of hazmat teams rushing to another emergency. Determined to find a way to stop the worms, Emily began her own investigation. She pored over research papers, consulted with experts, and even ventured into the forests surrounding Willowbrook despite the risks. She believed the key to defeating the parasites lay in understanding their origin. One day, while exploring the woods, Emily stumbled upon an abandoned mine shaft. The entrance was overgrown with vines, and a strange metallic smell emanated from within. Curiosity got the better of her, and she decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight and a can of UV spray provided by the scientists, she descended into the darkness. The mine was damp and cold, the walls slick with moisture. As she ventured deeper, she noticed something unusual. The walls were covered in a strange, bioluminescent fungus that pulsed with a faint green light. The air grew thicker and the metallic smell intensified. Then she saw it. A massive chamber filled with writhing worms. They clung to the walls, the ceiling, and the floor, their translucent bodies glowing in the dim light. Emily's heart raced as she realized what she had found: the worm's nest. She quickly sprayed the area with UV light, causing the worms to recoil and retreat. But before she could leave, something even more horrifying caught her eye: a humanoid figure, partially buried in the worms. It was a man, his body twisted and deformed, his eyes hollow and lifeless. The worms seemed to be feeding on him, their bodies pulsating as they absorbed his flesh. Terrified, Emily fled the mine and reported her findings to the scientists. They immediately launched an expedition to the mine armed with UV lights and specialized equipment. What they discovered was beyond anything they could have imagined. The discovery of the mine and the truth behind the worm's origin was a turning point in the fight against the parasites. Armed with this knowledge, the scientists developed a plan to eradicate the worms once and for all. The plan was risky, but necessary. The scientists would use a combination of UV light and a specially designed toxin to destroy the worms and their nest. Emily, Dr. Harris, and a team of volunteers would lead the operation, venturing into the mine to deploy the toxin. Emily and Dr. Harris worked quickly, setting up the toxin dispensers and activating the UV lights. The worms reacted violently, thrashing and coiling as the light and toxin took effect. The chamber was filled with the sound of hissing and the sickening squelch of dying worms. But the battle was far from over. The worms fought back, lunging at the team with terrifying speed. Emily and Dr. Harris were forced to retreat, narrowly escaping the collapsing chamber as the toxin spread through the mine. The operation was a success. The worms were eradicated and the mine was sealed once again. Willowbrook was finally free from the grip of the parasites, but the town would never be the same. The quarantine was lifted and life slowly returned to normal, but the scars of the ordeal remained. Emily and Whiskers moved away from Willowbrook, seeking a fresh start. Though they had survived the nightmare, the experience had left them deeply traumatized. Emily continued her work as a photographer, but she also became an advocate for transparency in scientific research, using her story to highlight the dangers of unchecked experimentation. As for the worms, their existence remained a closely guarded secret. The government covered up the incident once again, ensuring that the truth would never come to light. But for those who had lived through the nightmare, the memory of the worms would haunt them forever. Years later, Emily returned to Willowbrook to visit Dr. Harris. The town had changed, its streets bustling with life once again. But as she walked through the forest, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her from the shadows. She stopped at the entrance to the mine, now sealed with concrete and steel. A faint earthy smell lingered in the air, and the ground beneath her feet felt unnaturally warm. She knelt down, her hand brushing against the soil, and for a moment she thought she saw something move. A faint, translucent shape, writhing and pulsating in the darkness. Emily stood up quickly, her heart racing. She told herself it was just her imagination, a trick of the light. But as she walked away, she couldn't help but wonder, had they really destroyed all the worms? Or were they still out there, waiting for the right moment to emerge once again?